Good morning, everybody, and welcome to EqualPay. I hope you've had a chance to answer the poll questions that were posted on this page earlier. And as we go through our presentation, we're going to share with you some of the results of your answers. I'm Grace Protos. I'm the Regional Administrator for the Women's Bureau at the United States Department of Labor, and I oversee two regions of the Women's Bureau, one based in the Northeast, which includes New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. I also oversee a Midwest region, which includes Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Michigan. And I want to welcome you all this morning for what we hope will be an informative hour. And this is just an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Women's Bureau. We're going to hear from the American Association of University Women, AAUW. We're going to hear on the statistics on the pay gap from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, one of our sister agencies at the Department of Labor. And then we're going to hear two presentations from AAUW, two of their resources, Graduating to a Pay Gap, and their Start Smart Salary Negotiation. We're also going to hear from Equal Employment Opportunity Commission about protections and enforcement. And then we have some suggestions for you on what you can do with your students. And finally, we're going to end with some questions and answers. So who are we? Well, the Women's Bureau was established in 1920, the same year that women got the right to vote. And we're the only federal agency tasked with safeguarding the interests of working women. We develop policies and standards to safeguard the interests of working women. We advocate for their equality, their economic security for themselves and for their families. And these are our priority areas. And I'm going to go through them briefly. I'm going to hold off on equal pay. I'll get back to that in just a second. But workplace flexibility is a high priority for the Women's Bureau. We want to make sure that businesses understand the benefits behind workplace flexibility from a business case. We also want to make sure that women are going into higher paying jobs. We want to make sure that they're getting out of the cycle of poverty and understanding what some of the higher paying jobs are that are out there, and particularly want to target women who are coming into the work environment, women that are going in and out of the work environment, to make sure that they have a good understanding of some of the available jobs that will get them into a higher paying job. We also have a very high focus on female veterans, and we've got a resource that I'll talk about in just a moment. And I should mention to you with Equal Pay that the Women's Bureau is part of the Department of Labor is part of the National Equal Pay Task Force. The persistent gap between men and women is something that the Obama administration is committed to closing. And as you know, the first bill that President Obama signed into law was the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009. And he's committed to seeing that the Paycheck Fairness Act is also passed in order to close the loopholes in the Equal Pay Act. The President has established a National Equal Pay Task Force. It's comprised of 4 federal agencies, including the Department of Labor and EEOC, who you'll hear about a little bit later. And we're all working together to attack the issue on multiple levels. And today's forum really represents only one of the cooperative efforts being planned by federal agencies included in the National Task Force. So why does equal pay matter? Well, it's a family issue. For millions of working women, the gap means less income to pay for necessities like housing, clothes, and food. It's less income to pay for their children's education. It's less that goes towards their retirement. And all of these are reasons that make equal pay more than just a woman's issue. It impacts families and communities and the whole economy. In 2010, women comprised 47% of the total U.S. labor force, and women are projected to account for 51% of the increase in total labor force growth between 2008 and 2018. And we know that women's to men's earnings ratio has been in the 80 to 82% range since 2004, so it's remained largely stagnant for nearly a decade. So with equal pay, we particularly want to target young women because many do not realize that this is still an issue today. A lot of young women think that it's an issue their grandmothers faced or their mothers faced, but it's still an issue today, and we want to make sure that they're informed. And it's for this reason that we've collaborated today with AAUW and some of our other sister agencies and federal agencies to talk about and target very specifically the audience that you work with so that you can take steps to make sure that female students are aware that this is still an issue. These are some of the Women's Bureau resources. We have 2 equal pay resources, an employer's guide to equal pay and a guide to women's equal pay rights. And these guides are translated into several different languages, including Spanish, Chinese, French, and Vietnamese. We also have, with our focus on getting women into higher paying jobs, we have a guide called Why Green is Your Color, a woman's guide to a sustainable career. And with our focus on female veterans, we've got a guide called Trauma-Informed Care for Service Providers of Female Veterans. And I want to encourage you to go to our website, www.dol.gov/WB, so that you can see all of these guides. They're all available and they're all downloadable. And this is our contact information for the 2 regions that I mentioned. Feel free to contact us. And we look forward to sharing some of our resources and our great work with all of you. And now I'd like to introduce you to Kate Farrar, who is the Director of AAUW Campus Leadership Programs, who's going to talk to you about AAUW. Kate?
Thank you so much, Grace. This is Kate Farrar, and I'm so pleased to be with everyone today. Here at AAUW, we have certainly been working closely with the Women's Bureau and many other allies across the country to close the wage gap. And AAUW's mission is really rooted in ensuring that we are leading the charge in promoting equity in education for women and girls. Here at AAUW, our work started back in 1881 with 17 women really using their voice to enter the education systems. And today, our community reaches far and wide across this nation and internationally. So our community is 150,000 members and supporters strong. We have 1,000 branches nationwide. And most importantly, to this call today, we have over 700 college university partner member institutions. And we really ensure that you all on the front lines of working with students are really leading the charge for how we can make sure that women are taking the lead, not only in regards to fair pay, but their leadership roles as they leave your campus environments. I really just wanted to share an overview of all of the ways that AAUW achieves our mission. In our work, we really want to break through the barriers that women and girls face from a multitude of directions. We produce research. We manage over 5 leadership programs for campus women across the country. We do policy and program and research in the field of STEM education. We have our force both on the national and state level for public policy goals. We also dedicate efforts, funds, and support towards legal cases, so really making sure that we're attending to the workplace discrimination that women continue to face. We provide over $4 million in educational funding every year to women both nationally and internationally. And our global connections reach far and wide with our representation at the UN and many of our collaborations with international institutions. And finally, with member leadership, we are committed to ensuring that our members who, again, are in every congressional district of this country, really are gaining the leadership skills through organizational membership. So as you can see, as an organization that has existed for over 130 years, we really want to meet the charge and meet the needs for women and girls today. And that's why I'm so pleased to be a part of this call with everyone, and we really hope that we can be a resource moving forward in your work on your campus. So on that note, I will pass it back along to our wonderful guests for the day.
Thank you so much, Kate. And we're going to be hearing from Kate a little bit later as she shares with us the AAUW Start Smart program. And right now, I'd like to introduce you to Charlene Pfeiffer, who is the Regional Commissioner at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Charlene?
Yes, thank you, Grace. As Grace mentioned, I'm with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is a Department of Labor sister agency to the Women's Bureau. We're the agency that publishes a great deal of the statistical data you see out on a monthly basis, including cost of living data, employment, unemployment data, wages and earnings, and also a great deal of information on employment projections, historical information on jobs and earnings. But over the past 4 decades, women have made notable changes in their labor force activities. Labor force participation is significantly higher among women today than it was in 1970, and a large share of women are working full-time and year-round. In addition, women have increasingly attained higher education levels. Among women ages 25 to 64 who are in the labor force, the proportion with college degrees roughly tripled from 1970 to 2011. Women's earnings, which I will focus on today as a proportion of men's earnings, has also grown over time. I'll present some current and historical information on earnings data for women from our current population survey. The CPS is a survey of approximately 60,000 households conducted by the Census Bureau for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. For those of you who were able to answer the poll, the first question was what percentage of men's earnings do women workers earn? I saw from some of the data that was posted that some of you answered 60%, some of you answered 70%, and some answered 80%. If you were in the group that answered 80%, you were correct. Nationwide, in 2012, women's earnings were 80.9% of their male counterparts. Among demographic groups, white women earned 80.8% of their male white counterparts' earnings. Black or African American women earned about 90%, while Asian women earned about 73% of their male counterparts' earnings. And earnings of Hispanic females was 88% of what Hispanic males earned. This data represents full-time wage and salary workers. We'll look at each of these individual groups a little more closely and from a bit of an historic perspective. First, let's look at women's earnings nationwide compared to their male counterparts. This slide represents median weekly earnings of full-time wage and salary workers in constant 2012 dollars. So that means that all of these data points, the dollars have been converted to the equivalent of 2012 dollars. You can see over the past 30-plus years, women's earnings as a percentage of men's earnings, and that would be the green dotted line. Let's see if I can use this little pointer. Women's earnings as a percentage of men's earnings have grown from 62.3% in 1979 to 80.9% in 2012. However, women's weekly median earnings, this red line, were only $691 compared to $854 for men. The percentage of women's earnings compared to men did peak in 2011 and then started dropping down again in 2012. But you can see that there's very little change in the gap between women's and men's earnings since around 1997. And this corresponds to what Grace was saying about this gap that's been pretty flat over a period of time. When we break these numbers out into racial or ethnic groups, we can see that the ratio of white women's earnings compared to their white male counterparts was 80.8%, which is comparable to all women's earnings versus men's earnings. The median weekly earnings for white women in 2012 was $710 compared to men's at $879. This is slightly higher than the nationwide data for all demographic groups. On this slide, we can see that at 90%, this green dotted line again, African American women earned the largest percentage of their male counterparts' pay compared to other races. And this is up from 74.4% in 1979, so up to 90% in 2012. However, the median weekly earnings were lower for African American women and men than the median earnings for all workers nationwide. In 2012, African American women's weekly earnings were at $599, and African American men's weekly median earnings were at $665. So you can see this is lower. Now, this slide represents data for the Asian group, and that data has only been available since 2000. So this slide's going to look a little bit different. It's going to have a little bit different perspective in terms of what you see on the actual graph. The ratio of Asian women's earnings compared to their male counterparts was the lowest at 73%, which is much lower than the 80.9% for all women versus men's earnings. However, you can see that the median weekly earnings for Asian women in 2012 was the highest among the demographic groups of women at $770. That said, it is substantially lower than the 2012 median for Asian men, which was $1,055 in median weekly earnings. This last group we'll look at is Hispanic women's earnings. As a percentage of Hispanic men's earnings, Hispanic women's earnings were the second highest at 88%. However, the median weekly earnings were the lowest of all demographic groups. In 2012, the median weekly earning for Hispanic women was only $521 compared to $592 for Hispanic men. So this compares to $691 for all women and $854 for all men. So it's substantially lower. And you can see over time that kind of beginning in 1997 or so, that again the pay gap is not narrowing at all between the Hispanic women's earnings and Hispanic men's earnings. And again, this information is all in constant 2012 dollars. Now, this chart provides another view of some of the same information we just covered, so I won't go back over the top portion of it. But it does have some additional information regarding educational levels, age groups, and marital status. Women who hold a bachelor's degree and higher education earn 73% of what males earned with the same educational level. And this is all demographic groups. Whereas women between the ages of 24 to 35, or 25 to 34, earn 90% of their male counterparts in the same age group, while those in the age range of 45 to 54 years earned only 75% of their male counterparts in that same age group. And then the other point or piece of information I want to point out is this second to last group. Working women with a spouse present earned 68.4% of males in the same marital status, that is, married with a spouse present. And now this slide is interesting. It shows those occupations typically held by women, and it shows the percentage of women's earnings as a percent of the males who held the same job. Now, women held about 9 out of 10 of the receptionist, teacher assistant, registered nurse, and bookkeeping and accounting clerk jobs. However, their pay was only at about 90% of the male counterparts who held those same jobs. In the higher paying job of human resource manager, down here at the very bottom, women held about 3/4 of these jobs, but their pay was 83.5% of the males who worked in the same occupation. These are occupations that are primarily held by women. Now, the last two slides that we'll take a look at provide a little bit of a geographic perspective on the same data. Since we're talking to people in the kind of the eastern region and the Midwestern region, I'm providing information on just those states. In New Jersey, in 2012, women's earnings were a little more than 79% of males, while in New York, the women fared slightly better at 82.9% of men's earnings, almost 83%. And in the center here, you see the average U.S. earnings again. In the Great Lakes states in 2012, women's earnings as a percentage of men's was the highest in Ohio, followed very closely by Minnesota. Both were higher than the annual average, while in Michigan, the women earned the lowest percentage of men's earnings at only 77.3%. So you can see quite a range here, particularly in the Midwest, in terms of the percentage of women's earnings versus men. So in summary, what I'd like to say is that while women have gained some ground in the percentage of men's earnings over time, which I started out with at the beginning, there's still a significant disparity, whether you look at race and ethnic group, educational levels, types of jobs, or geographic data. One last thing I wanted to mention is that I will have some takeaways I think that Grace is going to provide. One of them is a very nice flyer on our Occupational Outlook Handbook and our Occupational Outlook Quarterly that both provide information on jobs, key characteristics of jobs, work environment, wages, number of jobs, job prospects, etc., all online in as a very usable, easy search tool. So I encourage you to use that. Thank you, and I'll give it back to Grace.
Thank you so much, Charlene, and thanks for setting the stage on this really critical topic. I want to let everybody know that we are going to have takeaway resources that we're going to send to you by email, and so you should be getting that over the course of the next couple of days. And now I'd like to introduce you to Kristi Corbett, who is Senior Researcher at AAUW, who's going to talk to us about graduating to a pay gap. Kristi?
Thank you. I'm happy to be here today to share with you some findings from AAUW's latest research report, Graduating to a Pay Gap, the Earnings of Women and Men 1 Year After College Graduation. And before I do, I just want to thank AAUW's Mooning Leche Giving Circle, as well as AAUW members who gave to the Eleanor Roosevelt Fund for their generous contributions to this research project. So while most people have heard about the gender pay gap, like Charlene just described, many still dismiss it as just a reflection of women's choices. So they think that women earn less because they make different choices than men, or they're less committed to the workplace. Maybe discrimination plays a role, but these are some of the ideas that people have, that it's not always clear what goes into creating this pay gap. And so here in this report, what we tried to do is we explored the earnings of men and women just 1 year after college graduation, which is a time when gender differences in work experience and family responsibilities are small. So it sets the stage for a pretty good comparison, so we can kind of tease out the issues. So we used the nationally representative U.S. Department of Education dataset Baccalaureate and Beyond, and we analyzed the earnings and student loan debt burden of 15,000 men and women who graduated from college in academic year 2007-2008 and were working full-time in 2009. And this is the latest data available. Most of the graduates are young, 23 years old on average, relatively inexperienced in the workplace, have never been married, and are not raising children. So again, the broad similarities in the lives of men and women at this time in their lives sets the stage for a solid comparison. Despite these similarities, 1 year after college graduation, men are already paid more than women are paid. Among full-time workers 1 year out of college, women were paid an average of just over $35,000, while men working full-time were paid an average of nearly $43,000. That's a ratio of 82%. So why do women graduate to a pay gap? Gender differences in education account for part of it. A college degree improves earnings considerably. According to one estimate, on average, the individuals with a bachelor's degree earn $1 million more than individuals who have only high school degrees over the course of a lifetime. So a college degree definitely is helpful. But not all college degrees are equally financially beneficial. Graduating to a pay gap shows that for the most part, women and men graduate from similar types of colleges and universities and similarly selective colleges and universities. And women actually earn slightly higher grades than men do in college. So type of college and GPA don't help to explain the pay gap. One educational factor that does help explain the pay gap is college major. So for those of you who answered true to this question in the poll, you were right. Let's see. Despite the dramatic increase in women's educational achievements in recent decades, there remain deep-rooted gender differences in fields of study. As you can see from this chart, among 2007-2008 college graduates, women made up the large majority in healthcare fields. That's 88%. Let me see if I can use this arrow too. So this is 88% here, and women made up 81% of education majors as well. So clearly the large majority. Now, when you go down to the lower end here, this is computer and information sciences. Women make up just 19% of graduates, and in engineering, women make up just 18% of graduates. That was in 2007-2008. Other majors like business tend to be more gender balanced. That's what the blue lines are. That's where there's no significant gender difference in a particular area. They're more gender balanced, but most major categories tilt either male or female. And this category, this other one that looks the same, this is actually the biological and physical sciences, which of course STEM fields are not uniformly gender balanced. There are big differences. Biology tends to be more female and physical sciences tend to be more male, but when you combine them, we combine them in that way, and there you don't see a gender difference in the percentage of men and women. Students who graduated in female-dominated majors tend to get jobs that pay less than jobs gotten by students who graduated in male-dominated majors. So this chart shows earnings for men and women by major. Now, choice of major explains only part of the pay gap. So as this figure shows, even when men and women choose the same major, women are still often paid less than men 1 year after college graduation. So among business majors, for example, women were paid just over $38,000 a year, while men were paid just over $45,000 a year 1 year after college graduation. And among computer and information science majors, women were paid just under $40,000, whereas men were paid just over $51,000. The story is the same with respect to employment. College majors related to the jobs that men and women end up in right after college, but the relationship is not strict. For example, men who major in engineering are more likely than women who major in engineering to work as engineers 1 year after graduation. As this chart shows, again, the jobs that primarily employ men tend to pay more than the jobs that primarily employ women. The yellow line shows the percentage of women in each occupation. And as you can see, as the earnings get larger, so as you move to the right in the chart, the percentage of women gets smaller. And there's a clear exception, which is nursing here on the far left, which has a very high percentage of women and also high salaries 1 year out of college. But for the most part, you can see that as the earnings grow, as you move to the right, the percentage of women in an occupation goes down. This chart shows that earnings are similar for men and women in some occupations, like, for example, business support and administrative assistance. Any of the columns that are blue, there was no significant difference 1 year out of college between men's and women's earnings. But it also shows that women are often paid less when they work in the same jobs as men just 1 year out of college. So among teachers, for example, PK through 12 educators here, women were paid 89% of what men were paid 1 year out of college. And in business and management occupations over here, again, women were paid 86% of what men were paid. And in sales, women were paid just 77% of what men were paid 1 year out of college. In no occupational category did women get paid more than men. So for those of you who checked true in the opening poll question about whether women are often paid less than men in the same job, you were right. One other factor I want to mention is hours worked, because a lot of people who say that the pay gap is not a real problem frequently point to the fact that men tend to work more hours among full-time workers than women do. And there is some truth to it. Differences in the number of hours worked does affect earnings, and it does contribute to the pay gap. 1 year out of college, women in full-time jobs reported working 43 hours per week on average, and men in full-time jobs reported working an average of 45 hours per week. But when we compare the earnings of men and women who reported the same number of hours, men were paid more. So you can see in this chart, among those who reported working 40 hours per week, women were paid 84% of what men were paid. And among those who reported working 45 and 50 hours per week, women were paid 82% of what men were paid. So what happens when we control for all the factors that affect earnings together? To figure this out, we did a regression analysis and controlled for college major, GPA, type of institution, selectivity of the institution, occupation, hours worked per week, economic sector, months unemployed since graduation, age, geographical region, and marital status. We looked at other factors too, which turned out not to be significant, and so were not included in the regression, and these include race and ethnicity and whether or not individuals had children. So when all the factors found to affect earnings are considered together at one time, a 7% unexplained pay gap remains. So if you consider a hypothetical pair of graduates, one man and one woman from the same type of university who majored in the same field, 1 year later both working full-time, the same number of hours each week, and in the same occupation and sector, our analysis shows that despite these similarities, the woman would be paid about 7% less than the man. So education and employment differences between men and women do help to explain some, but not all of the pay gap. And what accounts for the unexplained portion? One potential contributor is gender discrimination. Increasing numbers of claims filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the millions of dollars employers pay annually in awards, settlements, and other legal fees make clear that gender discrimination remains a serious problem in American workplaces. On top of this, experimental evidence confirms that many people continue to hold biases against women in the workplace, especially those who work in traditionally male fields. Many of you may have heard about a recent study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which found that research scientists offer higher salaries to men who apply for lab manager positions than to identically qualified women. And both men and women were equally likely to be biased against women who applied for the job. So not only did these people hiring, they were more likely to offer the job to the man, but they offered him higher wages to start. So gender bias is still clearly an issue. Yet discrimination is impossible to measure directly, and many people who discriminate, both men and women, are not aware that they're doing so. So for all these reasons, it's likely that at least part of this unexplained 7% 1 year out, this unexplained gap results from discrimination. Other possible explanations for the unexplained portion include gender differences in willingness and ability to negotiate salary, willingness to relocate for work, to travel, the size of employer, and other unknown factors. We can't say with certainty what accounts for the unexplained part of the pay gap, but we do know that women are paid less than men as soon as they enter the workforce, even when they make the same choices with respect to education and work. The last two slides, I talk about student loan debt. The pay gap has an impact on college women's lives immediately following graduation. For women with college loans, the pay gap means that student debt takes a bigger chunk from their paychecks than it does from their male peers' paychecks, leaving women with less money to live on. Women and men pay the same amount for their college degrees, generally. Among 2007-2008 college graduates, women and men typically borrowed similar amounts to finance their educations as well, and that was around $20,000. This chart shows the percentage of earnings that men and women 1 year out of college devoted to student loan payments, known as student loan debt burden, in 2009 with 2001 as a point of comparison. So these numbers are a little bit hard to read, but the top section of each bar here represents those with a very high student loan burden, those paying over 15% of their monthly income towards student loan repayment. In 2009, 20% of women working full-time and repaying their student loans 1 year after graduation were paying more than 15% of their earnings towards student loan debt, compared with 15% of men. These numbers have risen in recent years. In 2001, 11% of women and 8% of men in the same situation were paying more than 15% of their earnings towards student loan debt. So it's increased for both men and women are paying this high proportion of their earnings to student loan debt, but there's a gender difference both in 2001 and in 2009, and the gender difference has grown. How much student loan debt is too much? In graduating to a pay gap, we make an estimate of what a typical woman working full-time can afford to pay and a man can pay, because, of course, for people who have higher salaries, they can afford to pay a higher percentage of their earnings to student loan debt. And so what we did is we estimated that a typical woman could reasonably afford to devote just under 8% of her annual earnings to student loan payments, and that her typical male counterpart could afford to devote just under 9% of his earnings. So using these thresholds, just over half of women, that is 53%, and 39% of men in 2009 were paying a greater percentage of their earnings towards student loan debt than what we estimated a typical woman or man could reasonably afford to pay. And by comparison, in 2001, 38% of women and 27% of men in the same group were paying a greater percentage of their earnings towards student loan debt than what was affordable for a typical woman or man. So both the last chart and this chart shows that student loan payments constitute a large portion of more college graduate budgets in 2009 than in 2001. And in both 2001 and 2009, more women than men had high levels of student loan debt burden. Women have higher levels of student loan debt burden largely because of the pay gap. So what can be done about the pay gap? In graduating to a pay gap, AAUW makes recommendations for employers, policymakers, and individuals to help narrow the pay gap. You can read the full report along with the recommendations at the URL here. It's free download, and you can also get printed copies for free. You just have to pay for shipping and handling at that website, at that URL. And I won't go into the recommendations too much here in the interest of time, but a few things we recommend are, first, for employers to do pay equity studies in their own organizations, to know what's going on, because many employers want to do the right thing, but they don't necessarily know what they're paying, if there is a gender difference within their organization. Two, for Congress and state legislatures to strengthen existing pay equity laws. And third, for individual women to educate themselves about what their skills are worth in the labor market and to negotiate if they believe that their contributions are worth more. This is a nice segue to the next discussion of the work that AAUW does on campuses on financial literacy and how to negotiate for fair pay. And here once again to talk about this is AAUW's Director of Campus Leadership Programs, Kate Farrar.
Thank you so much, Kristi, and I'm so pleased that we can share a little information about the salary negotiation workshops, Start Smart. And to really start us off, what I would like to do is reiterate Kristi's comment to the effect that this is really one of the ways in which, as individuals, we can encourage young women, in particular, the college women that we all work with, to negotiate right from that first salary. So one of the things that AUW started to do, starting in 2008 with an organization called the Wage Project, is we joined up with them to really build out the capacity to have these workshops across the country. So far, this workshop has trained thousands of women across the country. Just this spring, we were able to offer upwards of 200 workshops. And through this structure is we've also been able to offer the opportunity for individuals to become a trained facilitator. So Start Smart, in essence, really covers the basics of the wage gap, why it matters to college women. It also covers some of the basics of how to create a target salary, how to come up with a basic budget so you know what your bare bones is when it comes to asking for the right salary, but you also know where you're headed as far as a goal for a salary. And finally, most importantly, it provides the practice and the tools that college women need to go through the negotiation process. It's a 3-hour workshop, and this workshop has really gone through over 125 campuses. We have several campuses across the country who are committed through 3-year license agreements with the workshop so that they can offer the workshop on an ongoing basis. One of the things I wanted to mention before I refer you to all of the information of how to ensure that your campus can have this type of workshop is really the evaluation data that we have collected and analyzed in regards to these workshops. As I mentioned, we have partnered with the WAGE Project since 2008, and we've been able to collect data throughout that time period on really what women are getting out of this workshop. And we really view the workshop as focusing on building confidence around the efforts of budgeting and negotiation, and also building skills and knowledge of these issues. So one of the startling statistics in some ways that we found amongst college women who go through this workshop is really before the workshop, only 12% of participants have said they knew how to prepare for salary and benefits negotiation. But after the workshop, 96% said they had developed this skill. And I think this really speaks to the point of the question that was asked in the poll, if you even, in your role on a campus, speak to students about the wage gap. And it was pretty much a 50-50 split. I think in all of our lives, there are many opportunities to speak to college women about the wage gap. And this workshop in particular can really build those skills and confidence base for them to know how to negotiate that first workshop out of college. And on that note, there is a lot of information that I linked here in this slide about how to actually plan for a workshop and a potential facilitator training on your campus. You can also use the link to several of the documents that discuss where the workshop has been. So there's actually a list of campuses for workshops that have happened over the last several years, and therefore when you contact the WAGE Project about bringing the workshop, there is the possibility that the workshop has already happened at your campus, that there's a facilitator nearby, and that will actually reduce some of the basic fees that go along with the workshop. Again, we wanted to use today as an opportunity to make sure that we introduced this incredible program to everyone on the call, and that we really showcased how it has already made a difference in so many of the lives of college women, but it certainly is a tool for all of you to ensure that the college women you work with are fully prepared to take that individual action to reduce the wage gap. So on that note, I'm going to pass this back over to Grace to continue with the EEOC presentation.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you, Kristi, also for sharing really terrific information and great resources. I want to introduce you now to Elizabeth Grossman, who's Regional Attorney at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Elizabeth?
Good morning, everyone. I think we have a couple minutes left of the morning. Thanks for including me in today's webinar. As you'll see, I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to go through them very quickly, but I wanted to give you the basics on the EEOC. If you're interested in having further information or another speaker, we have 53 offices, and I can certainly hook you up with someone locally if you're interested in learning more. So we're the federal agency charged with enforcement of these 5 laws. They all cover wage discrimination in regard to different protected groups. In the private sector, we receive about 100,000 charges a year, so there is definitely the perception on the part of the public that there's a lot of discrimination. Charges are assigned first to an investigator. They might also be assigned to a mediator. They might be settled. and ultimately a very small percentage of them might be litigated by our lawyers here. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is our most used law. It prohibits wage discrimination based on all of the listed characteristics, including pregnancy, which is not specifically referenced in the original statute. It obviously covers all sorts of discrimination as well. And as I said before, all of our laws do protect people against wage discrimination. The Equal Pay Act is probably the most relevant to discussion, so I wanted to emphasize that. It prohibits discrimination based on sex in relation to wages and benefits, as well as retaliation. All of our laws also protect against retaliation in the workplace. So the basics of an equal pay claim is that the complainant receives a lower wage than an employee of the opposite sex in the same establishment. You can imagine there's been a lot of discussion and controversy and litigation over the definition of establishment, so let me just leave you with it's an open issue under the law, but the statute requires that the employees perform substantially equal work requiring equal skill, effort, and responsibility under similar working conditions. Wages is clearly interpreted to cover all forms of compensation, so any benefits are also covered as well. You all did very well on the survey question on the types of pay discrimination, but it covers salary, hourly rate, wages, bonus. It also covers access to overtime, meaning the opportunity to overtime, different types of overtime, assignments that result in commission, and it covers job steering where women may be steered to one certain track of jobs that has fewer hours or less promotion potential. We tend to investigate pay claims on a class or systemic basis. We don't have to, but as you've heard from all of the other speakers, there's concern from all of us presenting here today about systemic discrimination. So we tend to, even if we get a charge just from one person talking about themselves, we tend to do a statistical analysis of class, and then we would seek data for all women and men who are covered by the scope of the investigation. Here's the some of the data that we would seek, and we would look at that. Under the Equal Pay Act, you tend to look at comparators, but they don't necessarily have to work in the same time frame, so you might be looking at the person's predecessor to assess the equality of the pay for there. The statute, of course, gives employers defenses, which we don't have time to get into, but I've listed them here. No surprise, the fourth bullet, any other factor other than sex, and yes, Congress did put two others in the same sentence in the statute. Most of the defenses come from that fourth bullet, as you would probably imagine, but we certainly see the other three still. So all private employers are covered, unions are covered, joint labor management, apprenticeship, and training committees are not covered under the Equal Pay Act, but they're covered under Title VII. Employment agencies serving covered employers and state and local governments are covered as well. Federal employees are also protected, but it's a different system for them. The individuals protected, I think hopefully will educate people today here on some of these based on the survey responses, but employees as opposed to independent contractors, employees are covered, independent contractors are not, but temporary workers are. Applicants are covered. Of course, we cover hiring discrimination, former employees who may be subject to retaliation, associated people. So if someone is, let's say, married and engages in a protected activity and the employer wishes to retaliate and the employer retaliates against that person's spouse, that would be covered as well. And the commission does not look at the documentation of workers. All workers are covered by our law, so we do not inquire into status of workers when we're investigating the claims. There are some jurisdictional requirements. There has to be an employer-employee relationship, which gets the independent contractors not covered. For Title VII, the ADA and GINA, the employer must have 15 employees to be covered. For the Age Discrimination Employment Act, it's 20. For the Equal Pay Act, it's different. It's employees covered by minimum wage law, so it could just be one employee to have coverage under the Equal Pay Act. And typically, charges must be filed either within 300 days from the alleged discriminatory act or 180 days in a few states that do not have a fair employment practice agency. When we go to analyze a pay claim, we look, of course, at the jurisdictional requirements, but then it's really what evidence there is to support the claims, and you're looking at either data, documents, or witnesses. So we're looking at all these different items before we can issue a determination. The standard for reasonable cause is 51%, and more likely than not standard at EEOC. The monetary relief is a little different under the statutes, but it tends to cover back pay with interest, front pay. For Title VII, it's compensatory and punitive damages. For the Equal Pay Act, it's liquidated damages, which is double the back pay, and attorney fees are also recoverable under the statute. So just the first bullet on this slide is for the Equal Pay Act only. Since 1992, we received 23,000 Equal Pay Act charges just alleging sex discrimination, and we've recovered over $124 million in benefits. The last bullet I just put in there to show you, and another speaker addressed this as well, that from last fiscal year to the fiscal year before, there's a 23% increase in all wage charges under Title VII and the Equal Pay Act. Shows a pretty significant concern on the part of the public in terms of wage discrimination. So thanks much for your attention, and this is how to reach me or get more information about the agency.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was terrific information. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to keep us moving forward. These are some suggestions that we have on what you can do to educate the students at your universities and colleges and the people that you come into contact with. And they're just some suggestions of what you can do. There are really a lot of things that you can do, but really helping to raise awareness and educate not only yourself on this issue, but the people around you, your colleagues, the teams that you work with, and of course the students. The ultimate goal is to really get them to understand that this is still something that exists. So we've got a couple of suggestions, helping them to choose their major, offering workshops, talking about this issue. Certainly you can ask any one of us here on this webinar to come and present or to get a panel before your students. We'd be happy to do that, or to do some sort of other lunch and learn, but these are some suggestions. And now we're going to move into questions and answers. If you have a question, please press *6 on your phone to unmute yourself, and you can ask your question. And then we're going to ask you to please press *6 a second time when you're done asking your question, so that you can mute yourself and give somebody else an opportunity. So again, press *6 to unmute your phone if you have a question. Does anybody have a question?
I have a question.
Thank you. Could you please identify yourself and ask your question?
My name is Beth Keister. I'm a doctoral candidate at Utah State University. This was some really great information. My question is really for any of the speakers. Are any of your organizations considering parental status as a major factor in studying the gender pay gap? And if so, how?
This is
Go ahead, Kristi.
Sorry, this is Kristi Corbett from AAUW. So in the study I talked about, graduating to a pay gap, 1 year out of college, parental status actually doesn't make a difference, which is not surprising. And in fact, the mothers and fathers in that group actually were paid more 1 year out, but that was likely due to the fact that they're probably older. But in the overall workforce, there is evidence that that mothers are paid lower than single women, and there's been some studies, in particular metropolitan areas, that show that for young single people, women are getting paid more than men are. In large part, that likely has to do with the fact that women are more likely to have a college degree, especially in urban areas. Some of the men in that group are likely to be less educated. But in general, mothers do encounter a wage penalty compared to single women.
Great. Thank you, Kristi, for answering, and thank you, Beth, for asking that question. And I just want to direct everybody to the lower right-hand side of the screen while you're waiting to please answer those poll questions. We have a couple more questions for you. And again, if you've got a question you want to ask, please press *6 on your phone to unmute yourself.
Great. This is Elizabeth Grossman from EEOC. I just wanted to add on that point. EEOC doesn't exactly look at parental status, but we have an interesting analysis of caregiver status, which would both apply to caregiving for young children or spouses or parents. And we have some guidance on our website that you can find probably just by typing in caregiver guidance. Let me know if you need help finding it, but that talks about all of the different kinds of stereotypes and types of discrimination that get leveled against both women and men as caregivers.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Hi, this is Larry Jackson. I'm with Northwestern University Career Services. This has been a really interesting presentation. I actually have two questions. The first question is, how were you able to compile the data for the men in the survey results that you provided during today's presentation? And the other question I have is, will this presentation be available for, along with your contact information, for follow-up visits or questions? Those are my two.
Great. Thank you, Larry. We are going to make the presentation available. We could send it to you, or we plan on sending this PowerPoint presentation to everybody along with the resources and our contact information. And in terms of your first question about compiling data, maybe Charlene, are you available to answer that? Charlene, you have to press *6 to unmute yourself.
I had double mute. In regards to the data that I presented, that came from the current population survey, which the Census Bureau conducts for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And all of that information, plus much more, would be available on our BLS public website, which is www.bls.gov. You might have to do a little bit of searching, but if you're interested in employment projections, you would go to www.bls.gov/EMP. At that same site, you can find that Occupational Outlook Handbook, the Occupational Outlook Quarterly, and a wide variety of information from many of our surveys.
Thank you, Charlene. And as I mentioned, we are going to make that information available to you through a separate email. Does anybody else have a question they want to ask?
Hi, this is Janet Watkins from AAUW of Michigan. I just have a question with regards to how much study is being done to understand the impact of the wealth gap that impacts people of color, and explaining that unexplained part of the wage gap. Is the Department of Labor or Women's Bureau doing any research to understand how that also impacts the wage gap with regards to people of color?
We currently don't have anything that we've published that specifically relates to that. I don't know, is the Bureau of Labor Statistics doing anything?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, we have the data, we do publish the data, but we don't have any current research that I know of in this particular area.
There are statistics I've been looking at from the Women of Color Policy Network that look at single mothers and single mothers of color and how the wage gap impacts them. And part of their research looks at the wealth gap and the disparity that exists for women of color, where at the end of the month, when they're looking at how much money they have available versus Latina or white women, that gap is $5 for women of color, African American women, versus white women would have $6,000 for median wealth available to them. So it seems that might also be a factor in pulling down the wages for women in the categories of Latina and African American.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Janet, and thanks for sharing that resource again with NYU Women of Color Network. It's certainly an important question. Thanks for asking. Are there other questions? Okay, great. So if no one has any other questions, here is our contact information. This is how you can contact all of us. And again, we're going to make this information available to you via an email for those of you that logged on with your email address. And we'll have some additional resources that we think you might find useful as well. I hope you all answered your polling questions so we can get a better idea of how we can help you going forward. I want to thank you all for joining us, and I want to thank our presenters for giving us some incredible information. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.